Well, cool. Well, I'm not in my garage. I'm in my kitchen, so that's why I have this super cool background. I didn't realize it was going to be moving though, so
Oh, yeah, you got the Northern Lights there. Cool.
yeah, I wish that was real. All right. Well, nice to meet you. I've I've gone back to your website and referred to a lot of things and been like, wait a minute, I remember reading this one thing that he wrote, or like something like about a chart, and like, people asking questions, and I'm always like sending people links like, hey, go check this site out. Go check out, this chart showing whatever it was. But it's always been super helpful information. So I
Oh, great. I'm
appreciate it.
glad to hear that folks find that helpful. Yes.
Yeah, and I'm really surprised too, the number of people that I send links to, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, this site has been around for a while, and I had no idea it existed." And some other people too are like, "Oh, that chart looks familiar. I've seen that posted somewhere before." And so I'm sure people are doing screen captures, or taking some of your charts and posting elsewhere. So you're
Yeah,
supporting
I think
the community.
there's probably a few folks, yeah, like yourself that know about it and go to it and then just reference it, and then you got the other group that are just not even aware that it's out there. But I mean, the whether it's a well, so I used to post initially, like, I don't know if you go onto the VW Vortex site at all. Um,
I haven't as much. Well, not as much as I used to when I first got the car. Um, the forums, my brother-in-law and I were just talking about this. We're like, the forums have their place, and a lot of great technical knowledge, and people that are willing to help there. Where like places like Facebook or even Instagram can be kind of toxic environments where people just kind of like put everybody down. And there's people out there like you that have a really great technical ability and knowledge that don't care to deal with that, so they don't help or don't post there. They're just there with their popcorn, kind of watching, behind the scenes. So,
yeah,
um, but yeah, I am familiar with VDEV Vortex. I use it as a resource, and you know,
well, it's kind of having been around the VW. Well, I started, like I told you earlier, sent you the link there. I started out on the Audi side,
that's right.
and I mean, seriously, when I first started getting interested in the cars, that notion of uh, websites, forums, I mean, were not. It was in the. I happened to come in when they were going, but they hadn't evolved to where they're at. And it's interesting to have seen the lifespan of some of these sites. VW Vortex definitely not as active as
Yes.
probably historically it used to be. And the reason I brought it up was, you were talking about folks that aren't being familiar with the website that I've got. Um, I had posted some stuff there, and the moderator said, you need to just post your information here, not put a link to your site where it's at.
Oh yeah.
And I said, well, I'm not going to take a blog post and post everything here every time I do it.
Yeah.
And so I don't put anything there because they cautioned me about putting links back to my site.
Because you're not a
So
paid vendor, or yeah, linking that is one thing where the forums are kind of strange, is um, unless you're like, I've never understood how the vendor services work with them, but yeah, linking to something that you've created that is external to their site, they see as just all you're doing is trying to promote yourself, where you're just really trying to share information. um, so I don't know.
yeah, you could link to my site and that would be
Yes.
okay. I
Yeah,
cannot
you
let
know
you
what,
know on that forum that I've done something though.
just create a sub handle of like, not Jeff,
Right.
and hey,
Yeah.
check out this really cool blog post this guy wrote. Here's kind of some information about it.
Yeah. So anyway, it's I mean, that the discussion forums, the Facebook, the evolution of that, and where they've been and gone. You know, I've definitely seen that. The site that I started out was really more of an effort to be able to, you know, a lot of the information that I was collecting personally, sitting on an Excel file on my computer,
Oh,
and
yeah.
things that I were considering. I thought, oh, let me just kind of make this, you know, I mean, it started off really, and before I go down this path, if you have a structure that you want to follow, let me know, because I could
Oh,
just go
no,
off
no,
tangents.
it's totally free form and open. So feel free to get into whatever wormhole we fit into. So
Yeah, so you know, I mean, when I first got started, you know, I put myself like in the shoes that you're in, where I had just gotten the car and had some ideas about stuff, you know, and it was, oh, I want to put a different exhaust on, I want some different wheels,
Mhm.
and you know, and I did my research. Like, oh, okay, these guys have wheels, or these are the 4 different popular exhausts to get,
Yeah.
and I thought, well, let me go ahead and write about what my thought process was. You know, hey, these were the 4 that were out there. I've heard that this one's really loud, this one's quiet, this one was really expensive, and I heard this one doesn't fit very well. So my decision was I went with, you know, brand X.
Yeah.
And I just like, oh, let me just put this on the website.
And before you get
Um,
into that, so that's something I'm kind of curious about, you know, your thought process and what has guided you to do something like that. Is it the work that you do, or is it just your personality? Like, what's triggering you to feel like you need to go through and understand? I mean, I'm one of those people where like I will research the the heck out of it. Like, just I want to know everything about it, and then I'm going to compare them all. And you know, all I have is the data that's in front of me, not any expertise or you know just whatever the claims are that have been given. So I'm
yeah,
curious where you kind of got to that point and how you got to that point.
yeah. I mean, you know, and this is, you know, similar to being able to go through the history of kind of the way that these forums have evolved over time. There is my evolution over time to, you know, where I'm at right now,
Hmm.
and started off with, you know, just going and trying to find vendor, looking at, you know, my first real test came about because, yeah, I mean, this is partially personality driven. You know, just my interest in doing a lot of comparison shopping. You know, as a kid, I would do that. You know, when I was looking for a radio or something, or a
Yeah,
bicycle, you
yeah,
know, I'd be like, oh, what do I want to get? So there is that aspect of it. And then, I mean, in terms of like formal education, my area of expertise, or at least at one time, was engineering. So bringing that, a little bit of that mindset, plus doing a lot of data analysis and other stuff. So those lend themselves to this process. And, you know, that happened to be career-wise something that I got into doing. I mean, testing is what I do as a profession at this
okay,
point. So now that has evolved over time to what I've been doing, and the level of work that I do in that. But I mean, it's because it's just something I'm interested in. So professionally, I've done it, and as well with the car, it has kind of evolved over time as well, and kind of taking you back again there to the start, where my first eye-opening experience doing like a group buy for an air intake, you
yeah,
know, and the, you know, and hey guys, this thing increases power by X amount. And well, actually it was at, you know, the B5S4 has a mass airflow sensor, so you can measure the airflow through it. And it was, hey, you know, you'll be able to record 20 grams per second increase in airflow with our new intake. And I was like, cool, let me sign up for that. Because at that point I had, you know, like done, like I said, the wheels and the exhaust, I think, were the 2 things I'd done. So I was like, oh, I want to get some more power with an intake, and did this group buy. And there was another fella who, you know, and this was shortly after the B5S4 had come out. So there really wasn't much you could do with them at that stage.
Was that like
And
2004-ish or something, or when was that?
2000 was the first year that they were here in the U.S.
Okay.
So yeah, I picked up a brand new, ordered from the factory one in 2001,
Yeah.
and
So this other guy kind of came around with the other intake, or
so me and another guy on one of these forums were both part of the group buy. He'd gotten his delivered to him before me and had, gone out, used VAGCOM and logged the airflow. And I had some readings from when my car was, as it was still stock. I said, hey, send me the data. I'd be curious to see how it compares. And I overlaid them, and they were the same. I was like, really? And that is, and I won't say the vendor because they're still around, still a big name.
Yeah.
But called them out on the forum. I said, hey, look at this. They're like, oh, we've got data that proves that it does. And for years I hounded them and said, you still haven't shown the data. When are you going to post it?
Oh man.
And eventually they moved on to another platform. I mean, the V5S4 was only produced until 2002. So
Sure.
They moved on to later versions and whatnot. But it was kind of that reality check that maybe these vendor claims, I came into it pretty naive, believing what the vendor said.
Sure.
And that was my first, exposure to it not necessarily being the case. And, that's a number of years ago. Along the way, both professionally as well as with the car, I've learned more, in talking about how you're going about testing and whatnot. I've gotten better at that, considering certain things, picking up more tools and whatnot along the way, and then just the lessons learned. I did a lot of testing with the V5S4 on a lot of different tools, and here I am where I can take what I've learned previously and apply it and get to do things a little bit smarter. But you had mentioned something about, especially like this one here where I just did this test with a bunch of the intercoolers,
Oh yeah.
like 10 of these intercoolers sit in my garage, and in my mind was, I need to get these out of here because I buy these. I'm buying 99% of the stuff that I test myself.
Okay.
So
that was definitely something I was curious about, and I'm sure other people are wondering, are you just getting stuff sent from vendors or from manufacturers who kind of want to be in on the chart,
I wish. I wish they were sending me stuff, but no. Occasionally, and I do try to recognize that, because for one,
Sure.
I just want to be upfront, because I know that can lead to a perception of bias,
Oh,
or talking up a product. So so like for instance, MST Performance, who sent me these turbo inlet pipes. I definitely want to make sure that it's clear that, hey, these guys have sent this to me, the D088 intercooler, they provided that.
Oh wow.
But those guys are the rare exception. Mostly,
Sure.
I spend a lot of time in classified sections looking for good deals.
Sure. Something that's kind of lightly used, and I guess with some of the products, it's not gonna, there's not gonna have a whole lot of wear, especially when it comes to like airflow items, right? So.
Yeah, I'm pretty leery about buying suspension components or parts, wear type parts. But when you're talking about air boxes or inlet elbows or an intercooler, those types of things. So I'm always keeping an eye out. And and there's times where I'm not specifically looking for anything, but if I see something that I know that's a good price and that it's actually, I'm not going to go buy a piece of junk. If I don't think something's any good, I'm not going to buy it, because I know I may get stuck with it.
Sure. Who else is going to buy it from you?
Exactly. Right. So I keep an eye out for stuff, and when I see a good opportunity come up and I go, oh, that's a good part, the guy's selling it at a good price, I'll get it, I'll test it, and then I can sell it, turn around and sell it and get it. But back to the thing I was saying there, as far as the intercoolers, I had those. I said, all right, I'm gonna make a big effort here and stockpile intercoolers.
Yeah.
And I had the 10 in the garage, and I was like, all right, how am I going to test these?
Yeah, because the question I had posed is just like, how do you, one, how do you figure out the process? And then two, like during that process and, you know, having done, well, nothing similar to what you're doing, but having done like my own testing of sort of things, I refine the process along the way. And then I'm realizing like halfway through that I've done something wrong or I could be doing something better. That's kind of where you're going with this?
Yeah, that has happened. Like that test, you know, sometimes you just don't know what's going to happen. Well, you know, the inlet elbows were a pretty good example
Okay.
of that type of a situation where I had seen, there's very few companies that actually like show that they're doing a test. And you know, and came across one that had shown where they had set it up with an airflow test, and it was just the intake. But that was the only time I'd seen it, and so I went and I did the test. When I first started out testing those inlet elbows, I was just like, oh, I'm just going to attach it to the flow bench using a silicone hose, and you know, test these things. Well, then there was a vendor who said, hey, you know, we got this spare IS-38 turbo here that's not working. We'll send you the compressor cover if you'd like, and you can actually hook those elbows up to that thing and try and test it that way. And then I never heard from him again.
But it got you thinking, like.
But it planted the seed that, you know,
Yeah.
I ought to try, and I ought to try and model and I have a 3D printer, which has been supremely helpful, because that's another thing. When I started doing flow testing on the S4, I was taking pieces of plexiglass and a saw or a drill and trying to cut, and it would crack, and I'd start over again. And it took, and so I picked up a 3D printer. Like, this is fantastic. I can make custom adapters to fit these parts to the flow bench.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, why don't I had a turbo in the garage, and I said, well, I'll take the dimensions off of that, and I'll model the inlet, and I'll put it on there. Well, I did that, and the airflow was dramatically less.
Oh, interesting.
And I'm like, oh
yeah,
my
because I saw the shape of the one that you had before. I was looking through some of your old posts, was, you know, cylinder, but then it opened up kind of like an upside down funnel, right? Versus it just being a straight cylinder.
Well, I used a silicone, just a silicone coupler, straight silicone coupler, like you would use to attach a charge pipe to an intercooler type, or maybe like the charge pipe to the turbo muffler delete. But the thing was, the diameter is larger than it is going into the turbo.
I see.
So
yeah,
all the results, you know, were greater than what they should have been. And I was testing air boxes that way, and I'm like, oh, okay. Now,
well, but there's a point too where it's like, okay, even if maybe you didn't have the correct setup, you were at least having a fair comparison among those items. So even if your flow test numbers were higher than, say, what a manufacturer stated, then but you still had a fair comparison. But changing that in time, and now you have a better understanding. Like, I mean, I would feel like I'd have to go back and test things, but now it sounds like maybe you've sold some of those things that you had before and don't quite have everything. So, I don't know where I would go from there.
I mean, and you're correct that the relative performance would be unaffected.
Yeah.
But you know, sometimes I gain some insights, and I really try to feed that back, or I hope that some of these insights the vendors will use. So I thought, I was looking at that, well, if you were to create a smoother entry or a slightly larger entry into the compressor wheel, that should allow a little more airflow. You know, these air intakes have been shown that they can support more airflow than what this compressor housing will allow. and maybe some slight modifications to that compressor housing would improve the airflow. I don't build compressors, I don't do the turbo stuff,
Yeah.
but if one of these vendors, wanted to try something, and I reached out to a couple, I said, hey, if you want to just try and like machine a different housing, and I'll flow test it and we'll see if it makes any difference. It may not,
Yeah.
but you would learn something. If it made a difference, that might actually change how things are being done.
Sure.
That's not happened, but
Are you talking about the
yeah,
shape of the inlet at the turbo? Like if
yeah,
it was, I don't know, the technical shapes of like kind of like a smooth cone, or because you obviously wouldn't want it to be like a step or something, right? So would it be in some
right.
sort of attachment that goes on there?
I, I, I thought,
Maybe we're getting
it's
too far into the weeds on this topic.
yeah. So this was, I just did this with one of the vendors that sent a couple of their pre-production inlet elbows that they're doing some testing on. And we talked about what the results were, and I gave them some suggestions, and they said, well, we're going to try and send you one. We're going to make this a little bit bigger. Well, it came back and it actually performed worse. And they're like, and so that's really interesting to me.
I mean, you still learn something.
Yeah, when you do what, because normally it's, hey, make it a little bit bigger, it should do better. Well, they did, and it did worse. And then I was thinking, well, all right, why is that? And I start to go back through a lot of the data that I have and try and do some comparisons, and I start to find out, well, maybe it's the ratio of the inlet to the outlet. It's not just make the outlet bigger, but the ratio has between the two, because that is going to drive the airflow. How rapidly is it going to converge? And they may have made it too big, that it was converging too fast, creates too much turbulence, and actually slows down even though they've made it bigger.
Sure.
And that by making one end smaller than the other, it makes for a more smooth transition. And that's the thing, is we're starting to talk about pushing the edge here, pushing the edge of the envelope of performance, where these small things start to matter. I mean, just the run-of-the-mill part, it probably doesn't matter, but when you're trying to be the guy who says, I have the highest flowing part out there, you've got to start to pay really close attention to what you're doing.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, cool. So I see in the background there, it looks like you have 2 GTIs.
I do.
I didn't realize that. One for
Yeah,
testing and one for daily, or what?
kind of. I bought the GTI with the mindset that I'm going to start messing around with it. And my wife drove it all the time and said, I really don't want you messing with the car. And I was like, all right, that's cool. And I kept my eyes out, and having been around the cars for a while, again, I was just kind of keeping my eyes out for a really good deal. One not too far away that was already pretty heavily modified popped up, and I was like, oh, that's a good opportunity, because if you're going to test stuff, you want to have a pretty strong platform to experiment with.
Right.
And I was very leery of like I've got this IS38 Plus turbo on there, and working with EQT tuning, I was like, I'd really like to try and push the boost a little bit. I want to see, I'm going to put a different intercooler combination on there. And I want to see, I think you can probably push the boost more. If I wasn't really confident in the engine, I'd be a little bit leery of doing that. So finding a car that had already had a lot of expense put into it, fairly inexpensively to pick up, was a good test bed for me. So so the one has become mine. The hood's up, and it's up on ramps most of the time. I'm changing parts out left and right. And the other one's just the daily for the family.
Which reminds me of a question that somebody brought up that I was talking to. I'd put out kind of a feeler of like things to ask you that people were interested in, and at least a few people had reached out to me and said, it looks like he's been changing out parts pretty regularly. How fast is he at changing out an intercooler now?
I could probably have it done in about 2.5 hours.
Okay, that was about my guess, because I was thinking to myself, I haven't done an intercooler, but I was like thinking about the process and taking off the bumper and making sure that you're following the steps correctly, doing it for your first time could be like 6 hours or something. And then especially for me, if I'm recording it, like it's going to be a whole day.
Yeah.
So, but I was like, man, if he's done it even once or even 3 times, I bet you could do it in like 2 or 3 hours. No problem at all.
Yeah.
That's
I
pretty
mean,
awesome.
now, yeah, having done it, I think I've swapped intercoolers probably 6 or 7 times now. So,
Now, are you
uh,
changing any of the charge pipes or inlet outlet pipes on that, or is it just the intercooler cores that are coming in and out?
I have, I picked up a set off of eBay. I have a set of Revo, and then I have the stock ones, and I have messed around a little bit with them.
Yeah,
But, kind of, you'd asked a little bit about some of the testing.
yeah,
I mean, I try to test at the most basic element level.
sure.
So if I'm thinking about the charge pipes, well, there's 2 of them, and is the throttle pipe the one that I'm going to want to change, or is it going to be the one coming off the turbo? And the great thing about having the flow bench is I can break those up into separate parts and test only that part.
Right.
Because taking it out on the street and trying to see if my time accelerating, from 30 to 100 is improved, that's just a
There's too many
crapshoot as to whether or
variables.
not that part
Yeah.
made a difference.
What's the outside air temperature? What's the surface like? Are you actually pressing the accelerator all at the same rate? And there's way too many variables in street performance. You got to try and keep the testing as simple as possible, I'm sure.
And I think that's part of that's one of the things is, again, if you're that person that's trying to get to the very edge of the performance, testing it out on the street isn't, when you're starting to get between, brand X and brand Y, and they are both top performing in their whatever respective part that is, but you're trying to find out what the margin
is,
one
yeah.
really is the best. When you have to throw it in with an engine computer that's making its own decisions, and what the weather conditions were like, and whether your car was warm enough that day, and all this other stuff, and I think that's one thing that it's hard to communicate. Well, I can communicate it, but when it makes it onto the Facebook groups, the message that I am splitting hairs here a lot of the time.
I mean, that's kind of the way I've read it too, is like, wow, these things are really similar, and unless you're comparing something that's at the top end of the spectrum and the low end, then there might not really be a whole lot of like difference of the output of speed. Although everybody thinks about like, well, if I get the best of everything, then maybe that will have some value in the end. I don't know.
Yeah. And I mean, for the folks that are trying to set the world record, in their GTI and the quarter mile or stuff like that, those things matter.
Yeah.
For the most part, for everybody else, you definitely you sleep better at night knowing you have the best part.
Yeah. Well, like you said too, you don't want to end up buying a piece of junk that you want to buy something that's worth your money and worth your time and isn't going to fall apart. Which might be a good segue into, I had a question about, a lot of the work that you do is all based on performance. And so you're seeing who is kind of the best performing ones. And I said, I'll just read here verbatim what I had. I wanted to ask you who your favorites are, but that might tarnish your unbiased opinion. To remain unbiased, are there certain brands that stand out to you for one reason or another? Is that because of customer service, quality, cool factor, or local support? I don't know if that's something that you had thought about or care to answer.
In terms of, I really focus, I mean, as long as the part, I mean, it's got to be a decent quality part. I mean, that's certainly, and by and large, I'm probably not going to pick something up. Although, you know what? I mean, I've got the eBay front mount intercooler on my car here, and you know what? It works fine.
Yeah, I bet.
So I'm not opposed to going with a lower cost one if it's decent quality. But for the most part, gosh, it, you know, and I'll just ramble off a bunch of vendor names and say that I can't tell any difference between APR and 034
Yeah.
and Leo and Integrated Engineering and Revo and Unitronic. I mean, so I'm not a manufacturer. I'm not building this stuff. I'm sure if I was a guy who was into welding and manufacturing and building that stuff, I
Yeah.
might pick up on.
Okay. Yeah.
But that's not my thing. My thing is actually testing the performance of those parts. So I'll pick up on the differences in performance of them,
I see.
but manufacturing quality and whatnot, that isn't where I really have much expertise. So I couldn't tell you whether one was better than the other
Based on that.
in that regard.
Yeah.
So as far as like, you know, the vendors, I don't really have any favorites. I mean, I'm out for whatever the best performing parts are. There's companies. So, you know, when you talk about the testing and you see a lot of the parts testing, I mean, the work that I've done on the transmission tune over this past year, that's testing. That's going out and gathering data and evaluating it and providing feedback. And that, you know, Stratified has been, I was really impressed. I mean, I contacted them after I had tried their thing and I said, hey, I got some suggestions for you for how I think this could be better. Would you be open to trying to make some changes? And they said, we'd love to hear your feedback. Let us know. And 10 months, 10 months of work later, we finally finished. And I was like, that was really cool to have a company actively engage. And I know they can't do that with every single customer that's out there.
Right.
But well, when I contacted them, I had put together a several page plan with how I had evaluated their software, what I recommended making as far as changes. So I wanted to come to them and say, look, I'm pretty serious about this and I've done my homework. And, you know, and they were willing to take that effort on. So that kind of stands out to me as I really appreciate that when I have an opportunity, you know, I have an opportunity to, you know, it's my car, it's my product that I'm using, but it's also everybody else. I feel, you know, if I have a certain skill set that may help others out, it's nice to be able to use my skills to
and
help
your experience.
The larger.
Yeah. So I really like that though. Like it really seems like your site, which I'll link everywhere in whatever description, post on here, whatever, is really community and enthusiast driven to help others. You know, you're tracking all the information for yourself, but it's really something that I feel like you've put out there for other people to benefit from. So I'm hoping that, you know, other people will find that as useful as I have, even if I'm not changing. Let's see, my Golf R has an APR stage 1 ECU and TCU tune. It was that way when I bought the car. I'm probably not going to spend the money to go and like try out different tunes or change different tunes and stuff, but I enjoy reading about it, and I enjoy like, oh, maybe there is something that's really different. And if it stands out and everybody's talking about it, I don't know, maybe something worthwhile. But yeah, I enjoy at least the knowledge.
Yeah. I got to work on the menu. It has overwhelmed me.
Oh, on the website, as far as like navigation and stuff. Yeah. No, I mean, it's not terrible. What would you change on the website? Like if you had your vision?
Because I know there's things that I've written about and I have trouble finding them. And like, all right, this is a problem, because I really am making an effort to document everything I have on the website. So, and it's gotten to the point that I have to go into the search and try and think, okay, what's a key term that I can find that with, like this. And I
Who
knew
built
that
this thing?
I knew going in that was going to be a problem, because that was the experience with the B5S4, that the menu structure started to fall behind what was on there. And
Sure.
this site's been even worse, because I've been much more engaged in testing things with this car than I did with the previous one.
Hmm.
And so it's something I want to fix, and it's in my mind, and I've tried a couple different things. It's just not there yet, but yeah.
Well, at least at this point, people are still benefiting from it.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
you know what? Then they could just post a question on a thing saying, "Hey, have you ever tested this?" And I'm like, "All right, I'll at least, it's like I'm a librarian. I'll point you to the right section, and I'll get
yeah,
you there."
yeah, exactly. Here, it's on this row, this shelf. You'll find it here
Yeah,
if you can
exactly.
find it yourself.
Right.
Um, so we talked a lot about different manufacturers or vendors. Is there anybody that has come back at you negatively from any of the posts that you've done, or um, I can't
Um,
imagine that any of them would like kind of just have a public statement without contacting you first.
I've had, probably on like a forum or something, I'll post something and have like somebody from generally it's more like the small shop type thing, and it's probably personality where I
Sure.
get into a little bit. I mean, you get into disagreements all the time.
Hmm.
I've had a few of those that tended to linger. Although I would say that's probably precedes the work that I've been doing on the GTI. GTI really, I don't see that, and I can only, I mean, I'm yeah, I can't say whether it's things are different now or what. Hard to say. But no, by and large, I it's been extremely unusual for me to like get any pushback. And honestly, at this point in my whole kind of lifetime of doing this type of stuff, I wouldn't put up with it. Uh,
It's not worth your time, right?
Yeah, I mean, if a vendor wanted to come to me and do something, again, I've been doing test and evaluation for almost 15 years now.
Yeah,
So I really don't mind going toe to toe with somebody about the test and evaluation process that I'm following and the reporting that I do, because I'm pretty confident in what I'm doing, that I am doing as best I can to provide the information that I find and to talk about how I'm doing it. Now,
yeah,
somebody may be unhappy with the results, but in that, hey, you didn't cover this or you didn't do that. And I try to acknowledge that,
sure.
because I mean, there's always going to be limitations to what you can test, especially I'm in my
In
garage.
a garage with the flo with the flow bench. So,
Yeah.
uh, is that something that you just like acquired or you found on your own to buy, or
Well,
did it come to you?
so partway through the first, my first iteration of this with the B5S4,
Yeah,
and I started to realize that a majority of these parts are all dependent on airflow, and I don't have a good way of evaluating them. And I looked into, I mean, a Superflow, flow bench,
hmm.
you're talking $10,000 to $15,000
Oh yeah,
to
their
buy one of those things.
equipment for testing is not cheap at all, especially when you start getting into things that have like calibrated sensors and all of that stuff, and then keeping up on it all. It's
Right.
not cheap.
Yeah, and I mean, this is PTS is the group that puts it together, and it was kind of a collaboration, one of these things that the internet allows, where people from around the world contributed to the design, put the design stuff together, and kind of a do-it-yourself one. Uh, and I reached out to folks who had expertise, and it's made out of wood, but it just needs to. So I reached out to people with expertise in woodworking and electrical work, and so did my part and had brought in experts in other areas to build that. And it's been huge help for checking some of this stuff out. But, you know, in testing, there's always a point of you can just get really bogged down in trying to cover every single detail, control all the variables, and have to have a lot of expensive equipment, and then you don't do a test, and then you never get the information.
Yeah.
I try and get good enough information that I can make a decision on. I mean, because ultimately I'm doing this to try and make my car better. I need it. And do I have enough information that I'm confident that choosing between these two parts? I mean, I've seen that with like some of these intercoolers, you know, and the conditions that I can test right now are pretty limited. I mean, you know, it's like out on the street, and it's like, okay, it's not a road course. I'm not out there for 20, 30 minutes. So
you're finding a quiet spot out on the street somewhere.
Right. But the other thing that I try and focus in on is I want to test these parts in the operating environment that it's going to get used.
Sure.
So I had somebody suggest one time that intercoolers should be tested wide open throttle and 6th gear, max speed on the Autobahn. That's where you're going to find out which is the best. Like, I'm not taking the Autobahn. Why do I care which one performs best on the Autobahn?
Yeah. If you're commuting and you barely reach 50 miles per hour every day, you know, that's kind of silly. No, I totally agree. I mean, that's max performance, peak performance. And again, if you're going for some sort of world record, which.
And the thing is that probably doesn't tell the guy who's trying to set the world record in the quarter mile what intercooler is best for him.
Absolutely.
Those are very different conditions, and they call for a very different piece of equipment. And that's starting to get very nuanced. But again, if you're going to push the boundaries and you want to be at the edge of performance, you now have to really consider what are the conditions that you're operating under and find the ideal product for those conditions. And most of us are not that concerned about Autobahn or, you know, quarter mile. I mean, I would imagine the majority of people are just, I want to be able to accelerate onto the highway, and maybe once I'm on the highway, pass a car really fast and maintain maximum power.
Yeah, I think that's a majority of people, and even myself is like, I had a 2004 WRX wagon before my Golf R, and it was always a dream to like go and do some track days or something. But realistically, I was just commuting and like going out for a fun drive here and there. And so doing the tuning and doing performance and everything was just like a means of me feeling, for some reason, all that comes to mind is feeling better than, that I'm better than everyone else on the road. You know, I can accelerate when I want to, and I don't know, there's something to that, you know, as far as being able to perform and go fast when you want to in a safe manner.
Yeah, absolutely. It's nice to know that it's there if you need to use it, but you know, I've had some folks talk about, you know, like repeated pulls with an intercooler. You know, you got to do repeat pulls. Like, okay, maybe once or twice, but the only time I had somebody say, you know, you got to do like eight or so repeat pulls to see which one's best. Like the only time I've ever done that is when I'm trying to bed in the brake pads.
Yeah.
That is the only time.
Well, and that's something I was just looking at. I was looking at integrated engineering, or maybe not. No, Unitronic has a chart like that, and I think APR does or used to have a chart like that, where it's pull after pull after pull, and I'm trying to like process what the information means in my mind, and the only time where that's ever going to be the case, I guess, is if you're hard in tracking your car. Even autocross, like from all the videos I watch of other people autocrossing, it's less than a minute of time, maybe 30 seconds that you're going around this little road course. So those consecutive like 7 to 10 pulls, I guess it proves something, but it's not practical daily use that like you're using your GTI or even me with my R. I guess on that note, are you doing any sort of tracking or have any plans to do autocross or
I
anything?
do. Yeah, I mean, I certainly have that in mind. I don't have any place close by, but it's been something that I'd want to do. And actually, I mean, that's where I'd like to try and take it out and test under those conditions. As unusual as they would be for most people, I'd just be kind of curious to see how it does.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, I did track with the S4 a few times. I mean, the irony there was I had an APR, one of the ones that you could switch right on the stock
Oh yeah,
on the wiper stock.
yeah, with the switchable maps.
Yeah, and and I mean, I'm humble enough to say I am not the best driver. I'm not setting record times around these courses. I go there to learn and get a little bit better.
Sure.
But it was like I put the car in stock mode because I like the car. I'm not a good enough driver to need to have that much power. There's so
Yeah.
much that I can still get better at with stock power that
Yeah.
it's like the power is just a fun thing to go do. It's like it's kind of cool to pass somebody. That's really where for me it's most fun. It's like I'm on a 2-lane road and I'm up behind a truck or something.
Yeah,
And I need
short
to get
passing
climb,
lane.
and it's like woohoo! I get to accelerate fast.
Yeah.
But that's few and far between. It's just the fun of doing it. But yeah, I mean, actually so we do have a drag strip that's not too far away from here. And I've never done that before, but I thought that'd be kind of neat to test out some of these intercoolers because most of my testing is only for 3 or 4 seconds under load.
Mm-hmm.
If I can get up to 12, 13, 14 seconds, be kind of curious to see. Now again,
What it's doing.
that's not useful. That's not
Yeah.
useful for a daily car.
Yeah.
You're not going to go that fast on the street. At least I'm not going to go that fast on the street.
Nobody should be
but it would
going
be-
that fast on the street.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like through the process. I mean, between the two cars, having done a lot of custom tuning,
Mm-hmm.
how many times have I accelerated from legal to illegal speeds on the roads? Like I really don't like doing it anymore.
Yeah.
But it's kind of the remote tuning that's kind of just one of the necessary evils to it. I mean, anyway, thankfully there's some safe areas around here that are pretty remote that I can do that. But there's the drag strip would present an interesting test for me to.
Yeah. Well, I mean, too, still being on a drag strip though, there are some variables, time of day, temperature,
Yeah.
what the track conditions are like, you
Right.
get all that. How can you do consistent tests? And then, so that's where like, companies who are big enough to have their own dyno facilities and everything, and they're able to try and make those tests as similar as possible. I mean, it takes a lot of money to do all that. And that's where your flow bench just it becomes a very simple platform to I guess temperature doesn't really make a whole lot of difference in flow unless it does. I don't know.
That's one of the nice things about this particular style of flow bench. It really makes no difference to the airflow. I mean, you're measuring. I report airflow, but it's actually the pressure drop is what we're interested in. It's just it's the flip side of airflow. But yeah, but kind of coming back to the point of what you learn as you go along. That bench testing that I tried doing with intercoolers, putting the heat in it, I discovered that between testing it in the morning and the afternoon, the rate at which they would heat up changed, because if it was a little bit cooler, I mean, it was like I was getting very similar results,
Mm-hmm.
which meant you now need to expand like the scale to get in and see differences. But
Yeah.
when you're doing that, small variables in the environment start to have more of an impact. And it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot of times where I've done something and I've thought, that's not what I was expecting to see happen.
Exactly. So that's another question that I had for you is like, what is the most unexpected result of something that you've had? Whether it was on your flow bench or on the street, or even just like opening something up and being like, what the heck? Like, this totally not what you expected.
Probably, and thankfully you asked that because I was like, I had to think about that a little bit. And I would say testing the stock intake air temperature sensor, I guess the results were.
So wait, the temperature sensor.
The one that's here on the map sensor,
Oh
on the
yeah.
intake manifold.
Okay.
So I stuck a temperature sensor in the charge pipe, where normally you would put like a water injection nozzle.
Sure.
To see I wanted to see what the temperature was, 12 inches from the intake manifold. And, and there was at times it was 20 degrees different. I'm like, what the heck?
Wow.
That doesn't make any sense. Well, except for when you're, like full throttle at 6,000 RPM, at that point, the intake air temperature sensor was about the same as what the temperature in the charge pipe was.
Sure. So the temperature change in that distance, is that what you're saying? Or
no, the location of the, actually, I have a spare intake manifold I have sitting on the bench that I want to do some flow testing with to try and evaluate the temperature sensor and where it's at. But the temperature sensor in the intake manifold lies, except for when you're at full throttle at a very high airflow.
Interesting.
And so, I mean, and to me, that was just.
Do you think it's because it's doing like a curve smoothing type process in the background? Because in some of the work that I do, I look at a lot of data that is with commercial buildings, and so we pull out like control systems data, and there's some of the stuff that we get back where we have two sensors that are hopefully measuring something similar, but one has a different process associated with it where it has kind of a smoothing where it averages, the last 10 readings over the course of like 30 seconds or something. And so they don't look exact, but is it something like that, you think?
I'm not sure. I've so far I've only been able to go off of what the vehicle has as far as
Sure.
what it's reporting. So I don't know how the ECU is maybe manipulating that data to what gets spit out.
We'll have to ask Volkswagen to talk with them.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm looking. It's like, okay, here's where the air is going in, and here's the sensor.
Yeah. Okay.
And the thing is, but I'm not sure what the cause is. But the thing was, I did that. I don't know if it's been about a year or so, but I mean, I'd been on the forums and groups and whatnot for. I'd been looking for about a year at the GTI before I bought one.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been looking into like what modifications were and other things and how systems performed, to find out that when people were telling me, oh, I'm driving around, my intake air temperature when I'm cruising around is 20 degrees above ambient, I'm like, it doesn't matter. And because I have a sensor now that's in there that it tells me, actually, most of the time, the temperature coming out of the intercooler is barely above ambient, 1 or 2, maybe 5 degrees above.
Yeah.
All the time. Even though the intake air temperature sensor is telling you it's 20 to 25 degrees higher, that's actually not correct. It's because, I mean, I can't tell you why, but I can tell you there is a tremendous difference. And so when people will say, I'm seeing this type of a temperature, like, you're telling me what a sensor that is incorrect is reading.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, so like I have an OBD11 that I can do live data or even data tracking on or recording. I'm trusting that those sensors are telling me accurate readings, especially on a relatively new car. Like, I'm not going to expect that they're going to be wrong, but it's really interesting to hear that that's your experience where like you stuck in your own sensor, didn't get the same until a certain point, or certain actions were performed, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, until the airflow has been you have a very high airflow for extended periods. I mean, you will see that you see the temperature coming down towards what the temperature in the charge pipe is.
Mm-hmm.
And that distance of a straight pipe, I it almost defies physics that the temperature in this distance in a straight pipe, raises 20 degrees.
Yeah.
That just doesn't add up. And so, I mean, my conclusion is the intake air temperature sensor, because as the airflow increases, you see it start to approach what the intercooler outlet temperature is.
Yeah.
My conclusion is it's where the sensor is located. It's picking up there also seems to be a little bit of, so this is one of those things that I found really interesting. And you've seen a few manufacturers who come out with their aftermarket intake manifolds. And a question I would have for them is, can you place that temperature sensor in a different location, like on the B5S4, it's like right in the entryway of the throttle body.
Oh yeah.
Right as the air comes in, it goes right through that. Where this is offset, this is actually out of the airstream. And I thought, well, if could you make one? Because now what you're getting is when you get into boost, it's reading 20 degrees hotter than it really is. So what's that doing to your timing?
I mean, it sounds like a problem.
I mean, it's probably, well, here's the thing. It's reading high, so the engine is going to be conservative.
Yeah.
You're not maximizing the potential there. And that's always the thing I'm looking for. Like, there's an opportunity to maybe get more power. Now, there's probably a way for the guys who do the tuning to factor in that and say, all right, we're going to ignore, or we're just going to scale things down or whatever.
Or have some sort of conversion factor for, the intake temperature.
Yeah. So, I mean,
interesting.
So that's probably been one of, there's been others, but that is probably the most significant because it just changed my perspective completely on what I'd been hearing from other people about intake air temperatures.
Yeah. Well, I've got one more question for you. I think we'll have to wrap up, but one last thing that I was curious about is something that you've been wanting to test, but haven't been able to get a hold of or find the time for, and whether that's a product or maybe something that would require some or other kind of equipment.
I guess there's kind of two things there. Like I was talking about, as far as like the conditions, the drag strip, a road course. Those would be really interesting for, I guess, mainly like for the intercooler. I mean, most of these other parts are probably irrelevant under those conditions. The ever elusive, high power, quick responsive turbocharger.
I meant something that's real.
Yeah, the one that spools like an IS-20 and has the top end of the BorgWarner EFR or the Boss, whatever.
We'll just get something that's like a variable vane, right? Do they make something like that for our cars?
So
maybe we're getting into a whole nother hour of topic.
Yeah, so I've kind of been working my way through. I mean, my testing has been working my way through from. I started at the very intake and have been working my way through the engine.
I see. Yeah.
I've pretty much knocked out the front half, and so now it's like I'm on to the turbo, the downpipe, and the exhaust, which are a little more unwieldy to try and put on a flow bench.
Sure.
Probably the software tuning. I've still been talking with Stratified. I'm never satisfied with what I've got, so I've been trying to twist their arms to keep on working with me to do more.
Sure.
With the software. So, which that's not as visible, the testing, but for me it's satisfying to be able to go collect data, evaluate it, provide feedback, have some changes made. Turbocharger is probably the next thing on my, but
that's going to be an expensive one if you're buying everything.
Yeah. And, I tell you what, I mean, I've cataloged the number of different options, and it just blows me away that I've got like 80 different turbos you could buy for this car.
Oh,
It's just unbelievable.
Yeah. And so that's like, with all of the options of everything that's available, it sounds like there's a lot more turbos that are available than almost anything else. It's just that like option paralysis that I go through of like trying to figure out like this value and what makes it better than the other one, but they kind of like state it a little bit differently. Like this was measured at this point, and or you know, it's like comparing like crank horsepower versus all wheel horsepower, and yeah, that's a challenge.
Yeah.
But yeah, is there anything that you want anybody to know about you or the website, or is there anywhere that anybody can, how is there some way that people can support you to help pay for some of these things? Like is that something that's ever been something you've tried to do, or if you have just like
No.
a PayPal or something like set up, like if somebody's like, hey, I really appreciate that, here's $5.
No, someone had suggested that before. They said, trying to set something up, and it's entered my mind. I mean,
Yeah,
I actually, so there's been a handful of vendors who've reached out to me and said, hey, will you support, would you be able to test this for me and give me some feedback and stuff? And so that they're supplying the parts. I
yeah,
kind of provide the expertise and some of the tools and labor to get them information. I guess if I knew that there was something that, well, I get requests all the time. Can you test the Wagner intercooler? It's like I've never seen one come up for sale cheap, and I just haven't reached out to them to say would they supply one. But
yeah,
I mean, I do try to, if somebody has asked me, again, I got to pay for it. So, and
yeah,
I really don't really care for the idea of going out and saying, hey, can I get people to support buying
yeah.
something? That just isn't how I've been doing things. So it might be something to consider
It's not for
if
everybody. It's, I mean, you kind of
yeah.
feel like your hand is out, and how do you do that without looking like a guy who's just trying to get everybody else to pay for the cool things, right? Um,
Yeah, and part of it is because I'm doing this, I do what I want to the level that I'm comfortable with. When when a vendor contacts me and asks me if I can support them, I feel an obligation to do as
yeah,
much as I can, as well as I can, and that's a little level of pressure that I impose on myself.
sure.
That this is a hobby, and I'm trying to think. Oh yeah, I mean, because one of the vendors had asked me. They said, "Hey, we'd like to start sending you more parts, and they actually said, what would you charge?" And I'm like, if I can fit it in, I'll do it. But this is a hobby,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I don't want to make it not a hobby. I don't want it to not be fun because I feel obligated to do something
sure.
to a certain level.
I
So
totally understand that.
yeah,
Well, cool. Uh, Jeff, I really appreciate your time. I want to respect the time that we've been chatting, and a little trouble getting going, but
that
I
helps away.
definitely appreciate the information you're putting out there, and your website, My Golf Mark 7, or I guess if you say that right, mygolfmk7.com, right?
Correct. Yes.
Cool. All right. Well, I really appreciate your time, and I hope you have a great weekend.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Adam. I appreciate it. It's been fun.